Kansas takes on Cincinnati. Lance Leipold called the Bearcats the best team they've faced this year. We're going to get to know more about the Bearcats with Jeff Carr of Locked on Cincinnati. And are Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce going to show up?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson with Jeff Carr here on this Locked On Crossover Edition, Locked on Jayhawks, Locked on Bearcats, and we're going to be learning more about Cincinnati. We're going to try to learn more about Kansas coming into this one with the Bearcats. They're coming off a bye week. Kansas coming off a 31-point victory over West Virginia. They just came off the bye week. Jeff, thank you, man, for joining the show today. I think that's what everybody wants to know, though, right? Travis Kelce, they're at home on Sunday. The Chiefs are. Taylor Swift loves Lawrence. There's the quote that everybody in Lawrence loves. It's the old video of her talking about her friend Abigail who went to Lawrence, and she said, a perfect day off would be going to visit my best friend Abigail in Lawrence, Kansas. So do we see Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce there, and does this become the biggest circus in college football over the weekend that nobody thought would?
It's got to be the best chance for them to visit a Big 12 game this year, I would imagine. I know that they were there at Arrowhead whenever the Bearcats faced Nebraska, which honestly, had the Bearcats made a few more plays against Nebraska, we'd have felt a lot better about them than we do right now. But I'd say it's a better chance than not, although I can't recall more than a couple of other instances where they've showed up to a Bearcats game, especially on the road. But it'd be a lot of fun. They aren't the good luck charms that I'd hope they'd be.
Yeah. No, we're going to get into the game, headlines, player performances, who win or how do you win for either team here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and customers can bet just $5. If your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode. So what to you is the biggest storyline for Cincinnati coming into this game? Like, what is the importance of this one for the Bearcats?
I think this is just finding out exactly which Bearcats team they are. I mean, they just beat Northwestern State 70-0. I think there might be one team in the country in like 1A, 1AA that is better than them, or no, worse than them. Worse than them. Sorry, other way around. This was a horrible game to read anything into what the Bearcats could actually do. So if you're looking back and you're saying Brendan Sorsby didn't throw an incompletion in his last game, that doesn't mean as much as we thought it would. It's kind of like when you play NCAA 25 on like amateur on junior varsity,
freshman or varsity.
Freshman. It's not the kind of thing that you can really analyze too much from. So I have some feelings, but I also have way more questions than I have feelings about this team. The one thing that I know is that the defense looks a little bit better than it was last year, and that the offensive line looks a little bit better than it was last year. But how does that all play into actual competition? That's going to be the big question.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like that has given me troubles in trying to get ready for the preview of this game, because the Nebraska game, an inability to throw the football, but they ran the ball so well. So it's like, okay, they're a good running team, but they might have struggles in the air. And then against Bowling Green, it's like, they didn't have as good of a running game, but they had a really good passing game. And then you mentioned, obviously, no incompletions last game for Brendan Sorsby. So I think I've had difficulty trying to figure out exactly what this team is specifically. One of the big things that could change this either way in a pendulum for just how good that defensive line is, which already is pretty good for Cincinnati, is Dontay Corleone. What to you is kind of the latest on his status coming into this one?
They said that on his initial injury report designation, he's going to be questionable. He did practice on Sunday, so it to the extent that's kind of up in the air, but I would expect him to play. I actually got the chance to talk with our play-by-play guy for the Bearcats, and he said that if he were to put money on it, he would say that Dontay Corleone will play in this game. Now, the question will be, and he did this against Nebraska, he did this against Bowling Green, he was on a pitch count. And the pitch count really wasn't that high. So it's not as if he will be in on a series-by-series basis. It'll be a couple of plays here, a couple of plays there. And it'll probably be plays where they really, really look to limit Kansas in the running game, or at least on obvious running downs. And then probably in those really tense short yardage moments will be how they try to limit his exposure on this field. And it's going to be key. I mean, just watching what Jalon Daniels can do and what he has done for his career, like this defensive line needs Dontay Corleone to be on the field more often than not.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really big storyline coming into this one. And I think in the same way we're trying to still figure out, what is Cincinnati? I think we're trying to figure out, I think with Kansas, maybe a little more known in terms of, okay, Missouri's a pretty good team. You lost to them, but you kept it close. You blew out West Virginia. Fresno State's 4-1. You blew them out. The bigger question to me, like, I think Kansas should be a team that at least makes a bowl game. They should win 6 or 7 games. But the real question to me is Kansas a real team that can at least contend for the Big 12 title? They can win 8 or 9 games. And if you are, as good as this Cincinnati team could be, you're playing at home. These are the games you need to win to do that. So in the same way that I think we're going to learn a lot about Cincinnati, I do think we're going to learn a lot about Kansas in this one too.
Yeah, I think that this is one where Kansas has to look at and say, we've got to take care of business. Because if I were looking at the Bearcats from the outside coming in, like they're still trying to figure out who they are in the Big 12. And Scott Satterfield has had 2 very lackluster seasons to begin his tenure in Clifton. And for me, I'm asking questions of him. The questions are a little bit more muted from other folks around Clifton, but I'm curious to see exactly where the Bearcats are this season, because I mean, our everybody's favorite FPI has the Bearcats around 6 wins. Don't know really what that means, and I don't necessarily know where they all come from specifically. I mean, they do play Oklahoma State later, and it looks like that might be an easy win. But it's nice whenever they lose their coach already. But at the same time, this is the kind of game where Cincinnati needs to announce who they are. And they haven't had an identity yet on offense. Their defense has been bend but don't break. So what does that mean for a Kansas offense that was just big play after big play that just sunk West Virginia really quickly in that game last week, and they were able to really just kind of control everything from there?
Yeah. And I also think, like, from a Kansas identity standpoint, this is where Cincinnati becomes interesting to me. For so many years, like every year in the Lance Leipold era, they struggled with rushing quarterbacks. And now it's a new defensive coordinator this year with DK McDonald. Really the lone rushing quarterback they faced. I mean, some of the West Virginia backups were rushing quarterbacks, but that was late in the game, so it's not as applicable. But the only rushing quarterback they faced is Bo Pribula, the quarterback from Missouri, and they held him in check running. Now, the rest of the Missouri runners were not held in check in that game, but was that just one specific game where Pribula didn't really have to run? Is it something that DK McDonald, the new defensive coordinator, has kind of fixed and is something that isn't going to plague Kansas anymore this year? That to me is another thing I think we're going to learn about Kansas, because if that is something that gives them troubles and that was just a one-off against Missouri, I would imagine Brendan Sorsby is going to have a big day on the ground.
It's interesting because I note that he really gets his damage done whenever he's just not in rhythm passing. Our play-by-play guy, Dan Horde, mentioned when it comes to being a passer, he's a very rhythm guy. And if he's not in rhythm, he's not being effective. But when he's not in rhythm is when he looks to run, because he's like, okay, I'm not making things work with my arm. I will then go to the running game. He's not a run first quarterback, but he is an effective running quarterback when he needs to be. So that'll be the tough thing for Kansas's defense, is if they get comfortable in their coverage, then they're going to have to really make sure they key in on Brendan Sorsby's running ability and try to manage both at the same time, because if they fall back too much, that's when he's going to start to get those 8 and 9 yard gains that keep drives going when you think you've got everybody covered and you don't have to worry about any sort of first downs coming your way.
All right, I want to continue on with some of this talk about the quarterbacks and some players that could have a big impact in this one. We'll finish up with how does Cincinnati win, how does Kansas win, back in a moment with Locked On Crossover, Locked On Jayhawks, Locked On Bearcats. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how we craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch's just for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And they have it all color-coded. They've got a bunch of the different graphs. There's a lot of different ways to understand. Makes it a lot easier and simpler for my simple mind. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. Monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. That is monarchmoney.com, 50% off with code LOCKEDONCollege. We're joined by Jeff Carr. This is a Locked On crossover episode. Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, Jeff Carr with Locked On Bearcats, and KU takes on Cincinnati Saturday morning game. It's funny because there's certain schools in the Big 12 where it's like, okay, KU playing it Saturday at 11. Like if you're playing BYU or Utah, it's like, oh, is that going to be an advantage? But Cincinnati's actually the one coming with, I guess, an extra hour of I guess you guys are Eastern time, correct?
Yeah, Eastern times. It's funny to see like these noon games for us where it's like, pretty simple, pretty normal. But yeah, for you guys, you're still finishing off the mimosas, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those 11 a.m. games. Although for so many years, Kansas fans were used to the 11 a.m. games. Those were the only time they could get when things weren't going well. So you look at this one, and I think the quarterback battle is obviously super unique. And the quarterback battle is always one that is going to determine the matchup because it's the most important position in sports. But I am really intrigued by it this week because you have two quarterbacks who can be dual threats. You have two quarterbacks who can run the ball. You have two quarterbacks who have had some really good moments of throwing the football so far this season. And I think for me, Jalon Daniels does need to play well in this game. I'm very intrigued by the fact that I think Cincinnati's last in the country right now in completion percentage allowed as a defense. So they're giving up a lot of completions. But I'm also looking at it, and I think they're top 20 nationally in explosive play rate against the pass defensively. So they're not giving up big plays. Is that something that matches what you're watching in terms of they're just kind of, you mentioned bend but don't break earlier. Like, is that a design for Cincinnati to kind of expect like the other team to, okay, eventually they're going to kind of mess something up?
100%. I mean, they're doing their best to keep everything in front of them. And I've heard a couple of folks, and I've talked with Chad Brendel over at Bearcat Journal, and he's mentioned that, it kind of seems like almost to a fault. They give guys a lot of cushion, especially on third downs. They're really making sure people aren't getting behind them. And so there is that 6, 7, 8 yard intermediate passing game that is available to guys, but they're doing their best to make sure that nobody breaks one open on them. They think that eventually the opposing offense is going to make a mistake and at the very least drop a ball and, then they have to punt or something like that. But for the most part, the defensive backfield is playing, I also cover the Reds for Locked On Reds. They're playing no doubles when it comes to Bearcats defense. So that's going to be an interesting thing with Jalon Daniels, where it seems as though he was okay throwing a couple of short passes and letting some guys really develop their own routes and their own yak, and whether or not the Bearcats can actually tackle, that's going to be a big thing for this defensive backfield.
Yeah, I find that especially the West Virginia game, 50% completion rate. So if he has that same kind of inaccuracy, this could be a bad game. Now, majority of the season, he's at 67%. That hasn't been an issue. So I do find that interesting. And also, can Kansas find another receiver to step up? Now, on the Cincinnati side of things, I mean, I mentioned Sorsby, and we've talked a little bit about him. I want to talk about the offensive line, because right now, in offensive line run push, according to Pick Six Preview's advanced stats, they are number one in the country in offensive line run push. They are also number one in the country in sacks per attempt, because guess what? Brendan Sorsby hasn't been sacked so far this season, which, probably helps with his mobility too. But they're also top 30 in the country in both pass blocking and run blocking grade on Pro Football Focus. What has made this offensive line so good? And I guess, how do you view that matchup coming into this game?
I think it's conservative defenses that they played. I don't think anybody's really ran a whole lot of blitzes against them. I mean, Nebraska had the distinction of, the defensive backfield that they could just lay back and just dare you to throw the ball. So if they got pressure with their front four, great, but they knew their guys were going to be on your receivers in just about every situation. Of course, we saw that was what happened. I mean, Brendan Sorsby barely crossed 60 total yards of passing in that game. On the other side of things with Bowling Green, like it feels like they should have probably tried to sell out to put more pressure on Brendan Sorsby because of just how what happened. Like there were a few plays there around halftime that really sort of changed things for him. And that's kind of what flipped the game to a point where, yeah, the Bearcats won it, and at the end of the day, the margin looked okay, but that was much more of a gritty, dirty fight than you really wanted that game to be. So I think that there's a little bit of they've just faced a more conservative scheme up to this point, but there is a lot of experience on that offensive line, and they've got a lot of guys that can really lead this group. And the thing for me that's really interesting, and it'll continue to be interesting against Kansas, will be what do they do with right tackle? Because they keep shuffling guys in and out. The rotation seems to be changing week to week. So I've not really gotten a feel for who the main person is that they're really turning to at that right tackle position. So what does that affect in this game? Because we've seen a lot more focus on the passing game for Scott Satterfield, where he likes to run the ball. He would prefer it if his offense was 200 and 200 rushing yards, 200 passing yards, rather than, more to the passing side of things. But that's how that's been this year, is more on Brendan Sorsby, less on their cast of characters at running back. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out against the Kansas team that seemingly has gotten a lot more pressure. I mean, they limited West Virginia, and whether or not you'd say Kansas is good or West Virginia is just really bad, that's for another conversation. But I thought that their defense looked really well against West Virginia.
Yeah, and now that you bring it up and you mentioned that the 200 thing, like that is very much like what Kansas wants to be, a balanced offense. And I can't help but think, now that you bring that up, how similar these teams are in a lot of different ways. Again, you're talking about a dual threat quarterback. You're talking about running games that want to get going and have a balanced offense. I was looking at some of the running charts of where Cincinnati likes to run the ball. Both teams like to run the ball to kind of the outside on those like stretch plays and the outside run plays, which is very interesting. Both defenses run. Kansas has kind of been playing multiple, like sometimes they'll go 4 down, sometimes they'll play 3 down. But you look at Cincinnati and they're kind of a 3 down defense that can be multiple too. And then you look at both defensive coordinators. Both of them have previous ties to Iowa, or I forget if it's Iowa State or just Matt Campbell in general before he was at Iowa State with Toledo.
Matt Campbell. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think actually a lot of similarities here, which you would think in theory for two teams that, you look at recruiting rankings, you look at transfer portal rankings, are probably pretty close together in the overall talent of the roster. Obviously, player development and stuff becomes important, but maybe that just means it's destined to be a close game because you do have two very similar schools.
I think for me, that's where the importance, at least for the Bearcats on defense, the importance is placed on Jake Golday. Jake Golday is kind of their fourth rusher, because they do run that 3-3-5 and they really try to lay back on their coverage. So then it's up to the defensive line to get its pressure, but they add Jake Golday in more often than not to add to that pressure. And he's done really well for the most part so far this season. Even against Nebraska, he had a nice performance. So I'm curious to see how he can really work against Jalon Daniels, who I think is going to understand he's looking for Jake Golday and he's making sure that he doesn't get to him. And that if he can keep Dontay Corleone, and if he can keep Jake Golday away from him, he's going to have a good day. And that's going to be a big key for this Bearcats defense, because if Jalon Daniels doesn't feel the pressure, it doesn't matter how conservative the defensive backs are, it's going to be a long day for the Bearcats defense.
All right, I want to finish up here. What does it take for Cincinnati to win? What does it take for Kansas to win with Locked On Crossover, Locked On Jayhawks, Locked On Bearcats? And today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season's here, and FanDuel is making sure your kickoff is ready to go with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can get, we're about to, October is always the best sports month. You have MLB postseason going on. You've got NHL and NBA getting started. Obviously, we're in the thick of things with football season. weekend, we've got the Ryder Cup going on as well. So we're in that prime time of sports. And you can even over FanDuel get action on the Kansas-Cincinnati game where the Jayhawks are -5.5. They are -194 on the money line. Cincinnati +160. And the over-under is 55.5. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, Jeff. So before we get into, what does it take for Cincinnati to win? What does it take for Kansas to win? As we're here for Locked On Crossover, Locked On Jayhawks, and Locked On Bearcats. And thank you for listening to us and making us your first listen every day. Over under at 55.5. Would you be leaning one way or another on the total in this one?
This feels like the matchup with Nebraska. I don't necessarily know if we're going to see that limited of scoring, but I would be tempted to take the under in this one. And what's the weather going to be like on Saturday? I know that there's a lot of rain moving through the area.
Yeah, it's been raining like all day today. Let me actually take a look here. So on Saturday, it looks like sunny, 80 for the high, low of 58. So it looks like it's going to clear up by then. So should be pretty good weather.
Got some runways there. I think I'd still be tempted to take the under. I could see a 24-20 game getting out of this one. I think that the Bearcats cover. I don't know that they win, but I think that the key to that, and the key to them covering, regardless of winning or not, it's based on two things with the defense. Can they force a turnover, which kind of feels like the easiest, analysis that anybody's ever done. So I'll add to that, and I'll say be better on third down than they were against Nebraska, because Nebraska, Manny Mahomes completed 33 passes. And it was for an average of 5 yards a pass. So nobody was impressed, but it was the fact that the Bearcats kept playing this no doubles defense. And it was just first down. Then they found themselves in the red zone. Nice short pass for a touchdown. Get out of there with some good defense and you're fine. That's what they've got to avoid, because Nebraska had a very good day on third down. So can they get out of here without Kansas converting double-digit third downs, and can they force a turnover or two? That's what's going to at least cover, if not win, this ball game for the Bearcats.
Yeah, and I do look at this one as being a close game. And, I mean, you're looking at Cincinnati coming off a bye week. And when you look at all the crazy things that Kansas does that make them difficult to prepare for, the idea that Kansas was playing a game while Cincinnati had a bye, we saw the advantage of Kansas having a bye in the win over West Virginia. Now it's the other way around. I think that makes this one definitely tougher for KU and keeps it close. And honestly, that's my biggest worry, that what happens if this is a close game? What happens if this is a one-score game? Because Kansas, dating back to the start of the 2024 season, is now 1-6 in one-score games. Is that something that they're going to hit a reversion to the mean and all of a sudden they're going to start winning a bunch of one-score games? I don't know. We'll wait to see. But that is a little bit nerve-wracking from my perspective if that is the case. And it's funny because I actually had this written down. You brought up the turnovers. And like you said, being like, oh, the quarterback has to play well. And the turnover battle, those are obvious things. But it's 100% true. And when you're looking at it, again, I go back to the what you just said with kind of being able to dink and dunk down the field with the bend but don't break defense. Well, the bend but don't break defense, it works if you get somebody who's impatient or eventually throws that interception. It doesn't work if the quarterback stays patient, continues to hit those guys, continues to be accurate. But Jalon Daniels coming off that game where he went just 12 of 24, 50%. If he gets impatient at any point, it could lead to an interception. If you get impatient as you're driving down the field, it could be the difference of a field goal versus a touchdown, and that could be the difference in a close game. So I really do think it is being consistently accurate and taking care of the football. And then I think the other one is just if you do want to look at it as, hey, both teams want to establish the run, both teams want to run the football, who ends up with the advantage on the ground, and that's obviously a multifaceted thing. It's the running backs, it's the quarterbacks, it's the offensive line, it's the opposing defenses, the opposing defensive line. It's everything that kind of goes into that. But the team that wins the rushing battle at the end of the day, I think is going to be in pretty good shape.
What hasn't Jalon Daniels seen to this point in his career?
That's a good question. He's been around a while, that's for sure. I mean, the thing with Jalon has been, when he's on, he's about as electric as we've seen quarterback play at Kansas. And he is so fun to watch when that's the case. We've had to see some different injuries through the time last year. There were some inconsistencies, but he's a really fun player overall for Kansas. And, maybe that is the difference, right? I mean, Brendan Sorsby obviously has been the very experienced quarterback himself between starting games at Indiana and now in his second year as the starter at Cincinnati. But if it is a close game, then maybe you do point to that. Maybe you say, okay, Jalon Daniels is in his 6th year. Like that certainly can't hurt.
I kind of wonder, because looking at him and looking at Sorsby, like obviously Jalon Daniels has a leg up on Brendan Sorsby in this matchup, but I think that if Kansas allows Brendan Sorsby to get into a rhythm early on, I think that's going to be good for the Bearcats. But he has a problem when he's trailing. And I think, for me, the quick and dirty analysis of this ballgame is whoever scores first wins. And that seems weird because we know that games can change on many different plays and things like that. But I just see a very random chaoticness to the Bearcats offense whenever they're trying to get back into a game. And they were doing decently of keeping up with Nebraska, but it felt like anytime they had an opportunity to either tie or go ahead, they would make some kind of mistake and almost torpedo themselves out of that chance. And so I think I would almost even go a step further and say whoever wins this coin toss should probably elect to receive, because I think there's a really good chance if you score on that first drive, you're going to have the momentum you need to carry yourself to the end of this game. Because I think we saw that in the Virginia game for Kansas, at least from an outsider's perspective, the way that they were able to just score quickly and then just kind of control the game the rest of the way. I think that if the Bearcats allow Kansas to score quickly in this one, I don't think they're going to be able to catch back up and get that win. I think whoever scores first wins this ball game.
Yeah. All right. Well, he is Jeff Carr. I'm Derek Johnson, Locked on Jayhawks. Jeff Carr with Locked on Bearcats. Where can everybody find your work?
You can find me on social media. You can follow at @LO_Bearcats. You can also follow, that's on Twitter. And then you can follow on Instagram and TikTok. Still getting used to the new handles. At Locked on Bearcats, all one word. You can also follow me personally at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs on Twitter and TikTok, and at Carr Jeff with 3 Fs on Instagram.
Awesome, man. I appreciate the time, and should be a fun one on Saturday between Kansas and Cincinnati.
Derek, appreciate it. And then, of course, after this, we won't see each other until February whenever the Bearcats travel to Fog Allen.
Yeah, that's right. That'll be a fun one as well. So we'll have Jeff back on then. Always great insight with Jeff. And that'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks, our Locked on crossover episode. We'll be back with you throughout the week to get a little more preview with the KU Cincinnati game. Obviously, we're awaiting the injury reports and who's going to come out on the right side of those and where's that news going to be. So be on the lookout for that as well. This has been Locked on Jayhawks.